The letter came on a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday was the day I cleaned offices downtown, and my hands still smelled like the lemon stuff they make us use. I almost didn't open it. Big envelope, thick paper, a return address I didn't recognize. I figured it was another bill dressed up to look important, or somebody trying to sell me a warranty on a car I sold years ago. Then I saw the seal. Small, dark red, pressed into the corner. And under it, 4 letters that made my whole body go cold. MIT. I sat down on the bottom stair with my coat still on. Elijah was in the kitchen, and I could hear the soft hum of his chair moving across the floor. That sound I'd know anywhere by now. 19 years old. The boy nobody wanted. I opened it slow. The way you open something you're scared is going to hurt you. Dear Elijah, it said. We are pleased to inform you. I read those first words maybe 10 times before they meant anything. Then I put my hand over my mouth so he wouldn't hear the sound that came out of me, because I was there the day the last family sent him back. I stood in that hallway and heard the words the woman used when she thought I couldn't hear. It's not that we don't care, it's just that a child like that is a lot. A child like that. As if he were a burden with a face, instead of a 9-year-old holding a trash bag with everything he owned inside it. I was 46 years old the day I signed the papers. Broke. Alone. Fresh off a business that failed so hard it took my savings, my marriage, and most of my pride with it. I had $11 in my checking account, and a couch that smelled like the previous tenant. Everybody told me I had no business taking in a kid, let alone a kid in a wheelchair that 4 other families had already handed back like a package that came damaged. And now I was sitting on my stairs, in my work coat, holding a letter from one of the best schools on the planet, with his name on it. I want to tell you how we got here. All of it. The nights I didn't sleep. The day I almost gave him back too. The thing I never told a single living soul about why I really did it. Because this isn't a story about a wheelchair. It never was. Let me take you back. 2 years before Elijah, I had a life that looked fine from the outside. I owned a little catering business. Nothing fancy. Weddings, church lunches, the occasional retirement party where somebody's uncle drank too much and cried during the toast. I built it from a folding table and a used oven, and for a while it worked. For a while I thought I'd finally figured out how to be somebody. Then the economy did what it does. 2 big clients pulled out in the same month. I'd already spent money I didn't have on a second van, on a walk-in freezer, on the belief that things only go up. They don't. I learned that the hard way, sitting across from a man in a gray suit who explained to me, very politely, that I owed more than I could ever pay back. My husband left about the same time. He didn't slam any doors. That would have been easier. He just got quieter and quieter, until one day the quiet walked out and took half the furniture with it. He said I loved the business more than I loved us. Maybe he was right. Maybe I loved it because it was the one thing that didn't leave. So there I was, 46, divorced, cleaning offices at night to pay off a debt that felt like a second job all by itself. I'd wipe down conference tables in buildings where people made in a day what I made in a month, and I'd catch my own reflection in the dark windows, and I wouldn't recognize the woman looking back. I wasn't looking to adopt anybody. Let me be honest about that. People hear this story, and they want me to be a saint. I wasn't. I was a broke, tired woman with a hole in her chest she didn't know how to fill. The adoption thing started as an accident. My sister Denise volunteered at a group home on weekends, and one Saturday her car was in the shop, so I drove her. I figured I'd sit in the parking lot and wait. Read something. Close my eyes for 20 minutes. Instead, she made me come in and help carry boxes of donated coats. That's where I saw him. He was in the corner of the common room, away from the other kids, a book open on his lap. Not a picture book. A real one, thick, with a cracked spine. He couldn't have been more than 8. The wheelchair was one of those hospital gray ones, too big for him, the kind that tells you nobody picked it out with him in mind. Somebody just handed it over, because it was there. The other kids were loud, the way kids are. He wasn't part of it. He'd built a little wall of quiet around himself, and you could tell he'd been building it for a long time. I asked Denise about him without meaning to. "That's Elijah," she said. "Been here longer than most. Sharp as a tack, that one. Too sharp, maybe. Scares people." "Scares people how?" She shrugged. "He asks questions nobody wants to answer. And he stopped hoping a while ago. You can see it. Families come look at him, they get all soft in the face, and then they see the chair, and you watch them start doing the math in their head. Ramps, doctors, money, and the softness just, I don't know, drains out." I didn't say anything, but I watched him for a while. He never looked up from that book. Not once. Like looking up was a risk he'd decided not to take anymore. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about that. A kid who'd already learned not to look up. I told myself it was none of my business. I had $11. I had a couch that smelled like somebody else's cigarettes. I had no earthly right to bring a child into that. I told myself that for 3 weeks. Then I called the number Denise gave me, and a woman named Ms. Okafor answered. And I heard myself say words I hadn't planned to say. "I want to ask about the boy. The one who reads." There was a pause on the line. A long one. "You should know," she said carefully. "He's been placed 4 times, and returned 4 times. 4 times. She said it like a warning, like she was giving me a chance to hang up. I didn't hang up. What I didn't tell her, what I didn't tell anybody, was the real reason I couldn't put that boy out of my mind. But I'll get to that. They don't just hand you a child. I want people to understand that, because everybody imagines you walk in, sign your name, and drive off into some warm sunset. It's not like that. There were home visits. Interviews where a stranger sat in my kitchen and asked me how I'd handle stress, how I'd pay for things, what my support system looked like. I lied a little about the support system. My support system was a sister who thought I'd lost my mind, and a checking account that laughed at me. Denise said it to my face. "You can barely take care of yourself right now, and you want to take on a kid with medical needs? A kid who's already been broken 4 times. What happens when it's too much, and you give him back like everybody else? You'll be number 5. You'll be the 5th person to prove him right." That one landed. That one kept me up. Because she wasn't wrong to ask. The worst thing you can do to a kid like that isn't ignoring him. It's letting him hope, and then confirming what he already believes about himself. I knew that. I lay awake doing that same math the families did. Ramps. Doctors. Money I did not have. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw him not looking up from that book. Miss Okafor arranged the visits slow. First one, I sat across a table from him in that same common room. I'd brought a book, because Denise mentioned he liked them, and I figured it was safer than a toy. It was a beat-up copy of a science book about the ocean. Deep sea creatures. The ones that make their own light down where the sun never reaches. He looked at the cover. Looked at me. Looked back at the cover. "You know these are old facts," he said. First words he ever said to me. "This book's from before they mapped half of it. Half of what's in here is wrong now. Most adults would have been thrown. Been ready to make him grateful for the gift. I wasn't most adults that day. I was too tired to perform. So teach me what's right," I said. "I don't know any of it." He studied me for a long second, testing whether I meant it or whether I was just being nice, which to a kid like Elijah is the same thing as lying. Then he opened the book, and he started telling me about a fish that lives in total darkness a mile down, a fish that grows its own lantern out of its own body because nobody's coming to bring it light, and it survives. Down there in the cold and the dark and the pressure that would crush a submarine, it just decides to make its own light and keep going. I don't think he knew he was describing himself, but I knew. I came back the next week, and the week after. Miss Okafor said she'd never seen him talk to a placement candidate more than once. He usually shut down by the second visit, sabotaged it, made himself unpickable before they could reject him first. Get it over with. Control the one thing he could control. He didn't do that with me. I don't fully know why. Maybe because I never once pretended the chair wasn't there. Never got that soft, drippy voice adults get. Never told him how brave he was for existing. I just kept showing up, tired and broke and honest, and I think honest was something he hadn't gotten a lot of. The day I signed the papers, Miss Okafor walked me to my car. She stopped me before I got in. "I have to say this," she said. "Not to scare you, but because it's true. This boy has been let down by every adult who ever promised him something. If you're going to change your mind, change it now. Not in 6 months. Not when the medical bills come. Not when it gets hard, and it will get hard. Because he will survive you leaving. He's survived it 4 times. But I don't know how many more times a person can survive that before something in them closes for good." I looked at her. "I'm not going to leave," I said. And I meant it with everything I had. But meaning something and being able to do it, I was about to learn, are 2 very different animals. Elijah came home with me on a cold Thursday in November. Everything he owned fit in one duffel bag and a plastic grocery sack. He didn't say a word the entire drive. He just watched the streets go by like he was memorizing the way out. The first month, he barely spoke to me. He wasn't rude. That would have been easier, honestly. He was polite the way you're polite to a hotel clerk. Distant. Careful. He kept his duffel bag packed. I noticed that in the second week, he'd taken almost nothing out of it. His clothes stayed folded in the bag by his bed, ready. Every kid who's been sent back 4 times keeps a bag packed. It's not a mess. It's armor. It means don't get comfortable, don't unpack your heart, because you already know how this ends. I didn't say anything about the bag. I just made space in the closet and left the hangers empty, in case. Money was the thing that nearly killed us in those early months. I hadn't understood, not really, what a kid costs. And a kid with a body that needs extra costs more. The chair he came with was falling apart, one wheel dragging, the frame too small for a growing boy. Insurance covered part of a new one, and fought me on the rest for 4 months. 4 months of phone calls on my break, sitting in a supply closet at work, being transferred and disconnected, and told to submit the same form I'd already submitted twice. I picked up a 3rd shift. Weekends at a laundromat, folding other people's clothes. I'd come home so tired my hands shook. And I'd find Elijah still awake, reading by the little lamp, and he'd look up at me with this expression I couldn't read at first. I figured out later what it was. He was watching for the moment I'd break. The moment I'd decide he was too much, like everybody else. He wasn't being cold. He was bracing. Every tired sigh out of me, he cataloged it as evidence. Any day now. Any day now she sends me back. The school was the first real gut punch from the outside world. I enrolled him in the public school in our district, and the first week, the vice principal called me in for a meeting. Sat me down with that professional smile people use right before they make your life harder. The building wasn't fully accessible, she explained. The elevator was old and temperamental. Certain classrooms were up a flight of stairs. Had I considered a different school, one better equipped for his needs. A place where he'd be more comfortable. I understood what she was really saying. She was saying he was inconvenient. She was saying the same thing every family had said, just wearing nicer clothes and better words. A child like that is a lot. I asked her one question. Is he smart enough for the classes here? She blinked. His records are, honestly, exceptional, but that's not the... Then you'll fix the elevator, I said. Because the problem you're describing isn't him. The problem you're describing is a building, and buildings can be fixed. I didn't win that meeting, not really. I won a compromise. They moved his classes to the ground floor. It wasn't dignity, it was accommodation, the bare minimum wrapped up to look like a favor. But he got in. That night, at dinner, I told him he was starting Monday. I didn't tell him about the fight. I didn't want him carrying that. But kids like Elijah don't miss anything. They didn't want me there, he said. not a question. I could have lied. I almost did, to protect him. But I'd promised myself, the day I signed those papers, that I would never be one more adult who lied to that boy to make things comfortable. No, I said. They didn't. At first. He nodded slowly, pushing food around his plate. They never do. And then he said something that broke something in me. You can send me back, you know, if it's too much. The elevator, the money. I saw the shifts you're working. I do the math. He said it flat, no self-pity, like he was reading me the weather. I won't be mad. Everybody does eventually. It's okay. I'd rather you just do it now than pretend for a year first. 8 years old, doing the math on his own worth. Offering to make it easy for me to abandon him, because he'd learned that being easy to leave was the only power he had. I put my fork down. Elijah, I said. Look at me. He looked up. Those careful eyes. I'm not the elevator, I said. And I'm not the money. Those things can go wrong and I'll still be here. I need you to hear me. There is no version of this where I send you back. You can test me. You can be mean. You can shut me out. You can push as hard as you want. I'm not going anywhere. And I'm going to keep saying that until you believe it, even if it takes years. He didn't cry. He didn't hug me. He just looked at me for a long, long moment, like he was filing it away with all the other things adults had said that turned out not to be true. But that night, for the first time, I noticed he'd taken one shirt out of the duffel bag and hung it in the closet. One shirt. It was the most hopeful thing I'd ever seen. The shirt in the closet turned into two. Then a drawer. It took months, but the duffel bag slowly emptied, and I never once mentioned it. Some things you don't point at. You just let them happen. The thing that finally cracked him open wasn't a big dramatic moment. It was a leak. Our apartment had this pipe under the kitchen sink that gave out one Saturday, water everywhere, and I couldn't afford a plumber. I was on my back under there with a wrench I barely knew how to use, cursing under my breath, soaked to the elbow, and Elijah wheeled in to watch. He didn't offer sympathy. He did something better. He started telling me why it was leaking. Water pressure, the angle of the joint, the way the old fitting had corroded. He'd read about it somewhere, of course he had. And he talked me through it, and between the two of us, a broke woman and a 9-year-old in a wheelchair, we fixed that pipe. When the water stopped, he grinned. First real grin I ever got out of him. Whole face changed. He looked like a kid for once instead of a little accountant of his own abandonment. We did it, he said. Not you. We. That was the first time he let himself belong to something with me. After that, the wall came down brick by brick. He started talking at dinner, really talking, telling me things he'd read, asking me questions I couldn't answer, and then delighting in the fact that I couldn't. He had this mind. I don't have the words for it, not really. Things that took me an hour to understand, he'd have in a minute, and be 3 questions past. He didn't just learn things. He took them apart to see how they worked, and then he wanted to know why they worked that way, and then why that. His teachers started to notice. Most of them, once they got past the chair, saw it fast. There was one, Mr. Bell, who taught math, an older man near retirement, and he pulled me aside one day at pickup. Ma'am, he said, I've been teaching 31 years. I've had maybe 3 students like your son, and the other 2 weren't in his league. He paused. You need to understand what you've got here, and you need to protect it. Because the world is going to try to make him small, on account of that chair, and you cannot let it. His mind is the real thing about him, not the disability, the gift. I went home and cried in the bathroom so Elijah wouldn't hear. Not sad crying, the other kind. The kind that comes when somebody finally sees what you've been seeing alone. But I want to be honest with you, because this isn't a fairy tale and I promised you the real version. It was still hard. It was hard the whole time. Being seen by a teacher doesn't pay a medical bill. His body needed things. There were surgeries, one on his hip when he was 10 that I'm still paying off, that I'll be paying off for years. There were nights I sat at the kitchen table, after he was asleep with a stack of bills, and a calculator, moving numbers around like moving them would make them smaller. It never did. There was a stretch, that winter he was 10, where I genuinely didn't know if we'd make rent. I sold my wedding ring. I'd kept it, stupidly, in a drawer for years after the divorce, and I finally pawned it for a couple $100, and I told Elijah I'd lost weight, and it didn't fit anymore. Another small lie. I'm not proud of the lies. But some of them were the kind you tell to keep a kid from carrying weight that isn't his. And there was the loneliness. People don't talk about that part. When you take on something like this alone, the world doesn't line up to help. It lines up to comment. I had relatives who called it a phase. A neighbor who asked me, right to my face, why I'd take that on at my age when I could still have a life. As if a life was a thing that happened somewhere else, without him in it. I started to notice something in myself during those hard months. Something I hadn't planned on and wasn't ready to admit. I wasn't saving Elijah. He was saving me. The hole in my chest, the one the failed business and the divorce had left, the one I'd been trying to clean out of my life one office building at a time. It was filling in. Not because things got easier. They didn't. But because for the first time in years, I mattered to somebody. I had a reason to come home. I had a person whose future I cared about more than my own tired feet. And that's when the memory I'd been running from finally caught up with me. The real reason I couldn't leave that boy in the corner of that room. The thing I'd never told a single living soul. I had a son once. His name was Daniel. I don't say his name much. It costs me something every time. But you can't understand the rest of this without it. So I'm going to say it now, and I'm going to keep going. Because if I stop, I might not start again. Daniel was born when I was 26. He was sick from the beginning. His heart hadn't formed right, and the doctors were honest with us in that careful way that tells you everything before they say anything. We got 4 years with him. 4 years of hospitals, and hope and machines, and the kind of love that has a countdown running underneath it the whole time. He was the smartest little thing. That's the part that stayed with me. Even sick, even small, he was curious about everything. He'd point at the machines keeping him alive, and want to know what each one did. He wanted to understand the very things that were fighting to keep him here. We lost him a month before his 5th birthday. I don't have words for what that does to a person. I'm not going to reach for them. If you've lost a child you already know, and if you haven't, no words I put here would be honest anyway. I'll just say that after Daniel, I stopped looking up. Same as Elijah. I built my own wall of quiet and I lived behind it. The catering business, the marriage, all of it. It was me trying to fill a room that could not be filled. And when the business died and the marriage died, part of me was almost relieved. Like the outside was finally starting to match the inside. So when I walked into that group home to carry coats, and I saw a boy in the corner, sick body, brilliant mind, not looking up. A boy the whole world had done the math on, and decided was too much. I didn't see a stranger. I saw the child I didn't get to keep, given back to me in a different shape. I know how that sounds. I know a therapist would have things to say about it. For a long time I was ashamed of it, because it felt like I adopted Elijah for the wrong reason. Like I was using him to patch a hole that belonged to another child. Like it wasn't fair to him, to be somebody's second chance at grief. I carried that shame quietly for years. I never told him. How do you tell a kid that part of why you chose him is that he reminded you of a dead boy? You don't. You can't. That's a weight no child should carry. But somewhere along the way, the reason changed. That's the thing nobody tells you about why we do things. You might start for one reason and stay for another. I came to Elijah because he looked like my grief. I stayed because he became my son. Not a replacement, not a patch. His own entire person, with his ocean books and his questions, and that grin he saved for good days. Somewhere in those years of leaking pipes and fought over elevators and pawned rings, he stopped being about Daniel at all. He became about Elijah. He became about us. There was one night, he was maybe 12, when he asked me straight out, Why me? Out of all the kids in that place. You were broke. You were alone. Why'd you pick the one with the chair, the one nobody else wanted? Don't say it's because I'm special. Adults always say that and it's never true. I almost told him about Daniel that night. It rose right up in my throat. But he was 12, and he was finally starting to believe he was safe. And I didn't want to hand him the burden of being a stand-in for somebody else's ghost. So I told him a truth that was also true. Because you didn't look up from your book, I said. The whole room, all that noise, families walking through sizing kids up like a car lot. And you just sat there in the middle of it, reading, refusing to perform for people who'd already made up their minds. And I thought, there's a person who knows exactly who he is. And I wanted to know him. He thought about that for a while. That's a weird reason, he finally said. You're a weird kid, I said. And he laughed. God, he laughed. And for 1 second, in that laugh, I heard a little of Daniel too. And instead of it breaking me the way it used to, it felt like something healing over. Like two boys, the one I lost and the one I found, standing in the same doorway for just a moment. I never told Elijah about his brother he never knew he had. Not for years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before we got anywhere near a letter from MIT, we hit the worst year of all. The year I almost became number 5. He was 14 the year everything nearly fell apart. 2 things happened close together. The first was medical. A curve in his spine that had been watchable stopped being watchable and became a surgery. A big one. The kind with a long recovery and a longer bill. And the timing could not have been worse, because the second thing that happened was I lost the office cleaning contract. The company that hired us lost the building, and just like that, my main income was gone. I want to describe that stretch honestly, because I think a lot of people know this feeling even if their details are different. It's the feeling of doing everything right and still watching the floor tilt. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't careless. I was working 3 jobs and I still couldn't make the numbers meet, and there is a specific kind of shame in that. A shame that whispers that you are failing the one person who's counting on you. Elijah came home from that surgery in a lot of pain and a lot of hardware, needing help with things he'd fought for years to do himself. And a 14-year-old who has spent his whole life proving he doesn't need anybody does not take kindly to suddenly needing everybody. He got angry. Really angry. For the first time since I'd known him. He said things. Cruel things, aimed to wound. The way you aim things at the one person you trust enough to be your worst self in front of. He told me he never asked to be adopted. He told me I only kept him around to feel good about myself. He told me, one bad night, that maybe the other families had the right idea. And here's my confession. The part I'm least proud of in this whole story. There was a night, around 2 in the morning, sitting at that kitchen table with an eviction warning, and a hospital bill, and a bank balance that was somehow negative. When the thought came, I can't do this. Not I don't want to. I can't. It felt like a fact, not a feeling. I thought about Miss Okafor's warning, all those years ago, change your mind now, not in 6 months. And I thought, she was right. I was arrogant. I bit off a life I couldn't chew. And now the kindest thing might be to admit it before I drag us both under. I actually got as far as looking up the number, the county line. My finger was on the phone. I became for about 10 minutes at that table, exactly what everybody warned me I'd be. Number 5. The 5th adult to do the math and decide he was too much. What stopped me wasn't strength. I want to be clear, because people love to make these stories about how strong somebody was. I wasn't strong that night. I was empty. What stopped me was a sound. Down the hall, Elijah crying, trying to be quiet about it. The same way I cry in bathrooms, so he won't hear. He'd learned it from me, that quiet crying, and hearing him do it undid me completely. Because it meant that under all the cruel things he'd been throwing at me, he was terrified. He was pushing me away as hard as he could to find out if I'd stay. Testing. Same test as always, just louder now. Prove I'm not worth keeping so it hurts less when you go. And I almost did. God forgive me, I almost proved him right. I put the phone down. I went and sat outside his door, on the floor in the hallway, my back against the wall. I didn't go in. I just wanted him to know I was there. I heard you, I said through the door. I'm not coming in if you don't want me to. But I'm not leaving this hallway either. I'll be right here. Long silence. Then, small and wrecked, I said terrible things to you. Yeah, I said. You did. You're allowed. I can take it. Why? Because I'm your mother, I said. And it was the first time I'd ever called myself that out loud. It just came out. And mothers can take it. That's the whole job. The door opened. He was there in his chair, face a mess, and neither of us said anything for a second. Then he reached out his hand, and I took it, sitting there on the hallway floor at 3 a.m, both of us broke and broken, and somehow still here. We didn't fix anything that night. The bills were still the bills. But something between us set like a bone that had finally been put right. He never doubted out loud again whether I'd stay, and I never again reached for that phone. We climbed out of that year the slow way. A church group I'd never asked anything of quietly covered 2 months of rent. A neighbor left groceries. A settlement finally came through on part of his medical costs. Nobody swooped in and saved us. It was small hands, a lot of them, and stubbornness, and the two of us deciding without ever saying it that we would not go under. And once we were through it, something in Elijah changed. Like surviving that year proved something to him he'd needed proof of his whole life. That maybe he was worth staying for after all. High school is where I watched the whole world start to catch up to what Mr. Bell told me in a parking lot years before. Elijah found his thing. Robotics. Engineering. The place where his mind and his hands, and even in a strange way, his body all came together. He understood machines from the inside, the way some people understand music. And there was something else, something I only figured out slowly. He wasn't drawn to that stuff by accident. He'd spent his whole life depending on a machine to move through the world. A wheelchair is a machine. He'd been thinking about how bodies and machines work together since before he could read, because he'd had to. So when his school got a robotics team, he didn't just join it. Within a year, he was running it. This kid who used to make himself unpickable in the corner of a room was now standing, well, sitting, at the front of a team of teenagers, telling them how to build things. I went to every competition I could get to, rearranged shifts, called in favors, and I watched other parents watch my son. I watched them do the old math when he rolled in, ramps, doctors, poor thing. And then I watched the math break apart in their faces when they saw what he could do. When his team won. When the judges asked him questions, and he answered them like he'd been waiting his whole life to be asked. There was one competition, his junior year, regional finals. His team's robot failed in the first round. Some part gave out. The other kids panicked. And I watched Elijah go very still, the way he did when he was thinking, and then start giving orders, calm as anything. They had 40 minutes. He talked them through a rebuild he was doing in his head in real time. Rerouted the whole design around the broken part. They didn't just recover. They won the whole thing. Afterward, a man came up to me in the stands. Introduced himself as a professor from a university 2 states over. He'd been a judge. Your son, he said. How is he this good? I looked out at Elijah, surrounded by his team, laughing, holding a trophy nearly as big as him. He had to make his own light, I said. The professor looked confused. I didn't explain. It was a thing between me and a book about deep-sea fish and a boy who taught me what that book meant. But here's the part that mattered more than any trophy. Around that same time, Elijah started doing something with his talent that I never taught him and never expected. He started helping other kids. Quietly. There was a boy on his team whose family was even worse off than us, a kid who couldn't afford the fee for a summer program. Elijah found out. And without telling me, without telling anyone, he took the small prize money he'd won from a science competition, money he could have kept, Money God knows he'd earned, and he paid that boy's fee. Anonymous. Told the program it was from a friend. I only found out months later, by accident, from the other boy's mother, who cried when she thanked me, and I had no idea what she was talking about. When I asked Elijah about it, he shrugged like it was nothing. Somebody paid a fee for me once, he said. A long time ago. Some family I never even met covered my chair repair when the insurance wouldn't. Ms. Okafor told me about it once. Never knew who. I always wanted to say thank you and I couldn't, so. He shrugged again. I figure you say thank you by passing it down, not back. I had to leave the room. Because that was the whole thing, wasn't it? That was everything I'd tried and mostly failed to teach him with words, and he'd gone and learned it on his own, and lived it quieter than I ever could have. The kid the world had done the math on, the kid 4 families sent back, was out here in the dark reaching down to lift somebody else. Making light, and then handing it to the next person who needed it. I stopped worrying, around then, whether he'd be okay. He was going to be better than okay. He was going to be one of the good ones. The rare kind that goes through the fire, and comes out warmer instead of harder. He started talking about applying to big schools senior year. Dream schools. The kind that broke women who clean offices don't usually get to say out loud. He'd look at me carefully when he said it. Still, even then, watching for the moment I'd tell him to be realistic. To aim lower. To remember his place. I never once told him to aim lower. Aim for the moon, I told him. Worst case, you land in the stars. And if the building's got no ramp, we'll make them build one. He applied to 6 schools. The one he wanted most, more than he'd let himself admit, was MIT. And that's the fall a knock came at our door that I was not ready for. She showed up on a Sunday. I opened the door and I knew before she said a word. You don't forget a face you've only seen in one old photograph. A photo I kept in a folder Ms. Okafor had given me years before, in case Elijah ever wanted to know where he came from. His birth mother. She was younger than me, worn in a way that had nothing to do with age. She stood on my porch twisting her hands, and she said his name like it was a question. Is Elijah here? I heard he's doing real good. I heard he might be going somewhere big. And there it was, the knife of it. Not is my son okay. Not I've thought about him every day. She'd heard he was doing good. She'd heard he might be going somewhere big. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door mostly shut behind me, because whatever this was, I was not going to let it walk into his living room uninvited. I learned her story standing on that porch in the cold. She'd been 19 when she had him. Alone, scared, and when his body came the way it came, when the doctors laid out the road ahead, all those surgeries and needs and money, she'd done the math too. The very first person to do the math on Elijah was the one who was supposed to never do math at all. She left him at the hospital. Signed him away. Told herself he'd be better off, and then spent years, she said, becoming the kind of ghost that haunts a person. I could have hated her. Part of me wanted to. But I've done my own math at my own kitchen table at 2 in the morning. I've had my finger on the phone. I know how close I came, and I had years of loving him behind me when I came close. She had 19 years, no money, no support, and a system that made leaving easy and staying nearly impossible. I'm not excusing it. I'm saying I'm not the one who gets to throw the first stone. But then she said the thing that turned it from sad to something else. I've been getting myself together, she said. And I was thinking, maybe now, maybe I could be part of his life. Be his mom. He's about to have a real future. I don't want to miss it. Be his mom. Now. Now that the hard part was done. Now that the chair had been fought over and paid for. The surgeries survived. The wall taken down brick by brick over years of quiet crying in bathrooms. Now that there was a future worth showing up for, she wanted to be there for the good part. I felt something rise in me I didn't know I had. Not rage. Something colder and steadier than rage. You did the hardest, most honest thing you could do 19 years ago, I said. You admitted you couldn't. I'm not going to spit on that. But you don't get to skip the middle. The middle is the whole thing. The middle is where you become somebody's mother. There is no shortcut to the end. She started crying. I didn't stop her. But I didn't fold either. Here's what I'll do, I said. This isn't my decision to make for him. He's 19. He's the smartest person I've ever met. So I'm going to tell him you came. I'm going to tell him honestly, the good and the hard of it, and then it's his. If he wants to know you, I will never stand in the way. And if he doesn't, you're going to respect that, and you're going to go, and you're not going to show up on a porch again on the day the good news breaks. I told him that night. All of it. I'd promised him honesty from the first day, and I wasn't going to break that even when the truth was a grenade. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked one question. When I was little, when it was all surgeries and no money and I was the hard part, where was she then? She wasn't there, I said. She couldn't be. That's the truth. I'm not going to make it prettier. He nodded slowly, and then he said something I've turned over in my head 1,000 times since. You know what's funny? For years I thought the question of my life was why did she leave? And somewhere along the way it just changed. The question stopped being why did the person who was supposed to stay leave, and it became why did the person who had every reason to leave stay? He looked at me. You did the math too. I know you did. I heard you at that table when I was 14, and you stayed anyway. That's the only math I care about now. I couldn't speak. Tell her I'm not angry, he said finally. Tell her I hope she's really okay, and tell her I already have a mom. I've had one for 11 years. The line's full. He decided to write her a letter, someday, on his own terms. Not a door slammed, just a boundary drawn by a man who'd learned exactly what he was worth. And 3 weeks after that Sunday on the porch, a thick envelope came on a Tuesday, when my hands still smelled like lemon. You already know what it said, so here's where I came in. Me, on the bottom stair, in my work coat, hand over my mouth, a letter in my lap that said we are pleased to inform you. Elijah was in the kitchen. I called his name, and my voice cracked on it, and he heard something in it and came fast, that hum of the wheels I'd know anywhere, and he saw my face, and he saw the envelope, and he stopped dead. Is that? He said. He couldn't finish it. I couldn't finish anything either. I just held it out to him. He took it. His hands, those steady hands that rebuilt a robot in 40 minutes under pressure, they were shaking now. He read it. I watched his eyes go across the same words I'd read 10 times. I watched him get to his own name. And I watched the boy who taught himself not to look up, not to hope, not to want things out loud because wanting was dangerous. I watched that boy finally let himself believe something good was real. He looked up at me, 19 years old. I got in, he whispered. Mom, I got in. And then this kid, this grown young man who almost never cried, who'd learned to cry silent from watching me. He put his face in his hands and he sobbed, and I got down on the floor next to his chair, and I held him, and we stayed like that a long time. 2 people who the world had done the math on. A failed businesswoman who cleans offices at night. A boy 4 families sent back. Both of us, at some point, decided by somebody to be too much, too hard, not worth the trouble. And here we were, MIT. I need to say something to you, right here, before I finish. If you've made it this far with us, through all of it, I think you might be the kind of person this story was for. So let me just ask you to subscribe if you would. Not for the numbers. Because there are more stories like this one, real ones, about people the world counted out who weren't out at all, and I'd like to tell them to you. That's all. Now let me finish ours. He asked me that night, after the crying, sitting at the same kitchen table where I'd once had my finger on a phone that would have ended everything. He asked me why I was crying that hard. Happy didn't explain all of it, he said. He could always read me. So I finally told him about Daniel. I told him about the brother he never met. The 4 years, the countdown love, the hole it left. I told him the truth I'd been scared of for 11 years. That part of why I first walked toward him in that room was that he looked like my grief. And I told him the other truth, the bigger one. That somewhere along the way he stopped being about Daniel and became entirely, completely his own. That I didn't keep him to replace a son. I kept him because he became my son. Fully. On his own. I was terrified of how he'd take it. That he'd feel like a stand-in, like second place to a ghost. He was quiet. Then he said, "So we both got a second chance at each other." That's it. That's all he said. And it was the truest thing anybody's ever said in that kitchen. He's at MIT now. He calls me on Sundays. He's already talking about designing better chairs, cheaper ones, for kids in group homes who get handed whatever's lying around, because he remembers being that kid with the gray chair that didn't fit. He's going to spend his life making light and handing it down. I have no doubt. People ask me sometimes if I feel proud. And I do, but not the way they mean. They think I made him. I didn't make anything. That mind, that heart, that refusal to break, that was all his, from the corner of that room, before I ever showed up. All I did was refuse to do the math. All I did was stay. That's the part nobody tells you about a life like mine, small and broke and unimpressive from the outside. You don't need to be somebody special to change everything for one person. You just need to see them when everybody else is doing the math. And then you need to not leave. Even the night you almost do. Especially that night. The wheelchair was never the story. The chair was just the thing everybody let themselves see, so they wouldn't have to see the boy. I saw the boy. That's the whole thing. That's all it ever was. If you're still here with me, I want to ask you something. And I really do want you to answer it. Down in the comments, tell me. Who was the person who stayed when everybody else was doing the math on you? Or, if you were lucky enough to be the one who stayed for somebody else, tell me about them too. Because I think this whole world runs on the people who refuse to do the math. And I think there's more of you out there than anybody counts.